of community-based research in movement for economic and racial justice, and specifically its relationship to the Oregon Economic Justice Roundtable. So that's on our agenda. Hopefully we'll maybe even let all of us go early, but in the meantime, we'll hear some updates. Is everyone able to see my screen? I'm sure that's a question that's been asked the most this year. Can you see my screen? Is this thing on? Great. Well, our first update is from the Base and Power Building Work Group, which is a group that I helped convene with a number of different members here today. And our last meeting was quite a while ago. It was before the short legislative session. But in that meeting, we wanted to discuss sort of talking about what we can bring as, what we can bring to a certain campaign that we want to help organize around. So we had conversations about how we can enrich an organizing experience like that. But then we also talked about how we want to be mobilizing people and how we can be removing barriers for organizations and groups, people to participate in a space like the Oregon Economic Justice Roundtable. And then we, of course, talked about outreach. A huge part of organizing this group of building power is getting the people in the room, right? So we talked about who we want to be connecting with, how we want to be connecting with them, and sort of began to outline a plan of how we can build power and what that looks like and how we're going to do it. So now that the short legislative session is over, I'm purposely letting that group take a deep breath. Many of our members were working the short legislative session, so hopefully they've taken some time off or get to take some time off here in the next couple of weeks, and then that group will reconvene and look at what's next here in the next month or so, hopefully. So that's a little update on the Base and Power Building. Again, if any of you are interested in talking about what it looks like to build power and build a base and organize with this group, please feel free to shoot me an email, ask me about the group, and I'll send you an invite to our next meeting, and you can come join us. Please do. All right. Next, we'll hear from our narrative work group, which I believe is Annette. Great.
Thanks, Ethan. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Yes, the economic justice narratives. I was going to say the other frequently heard statement over the last 2 years is "you're on mute." I was waiting to be on that too, because I do that a lot still. So the economic justice narrative, just for if people are not familiar with sort of what we've been thinking about around this, just to give the kind of high level overview, we've had a work group of roundtable members meeting over the last several months, I think at least since September, and talking about working towards, I should say, building a cohort of groups that will work on economically just narratives that will both, and thinking about narrative work, which of course many of you are probably familiar with, how narrative can help us understand, what it's sort of how we do analysis and think about what the problems are that we're trying to solve, and thinking about thinking about the ways that the narratives and stories that we have been using that have been harmful over time. And so we'll be working to sort of identify those, and then also be working towards what is our North Star for economic justice, and what is it that we want to be thinking about and building both culture change and ways that will help support and shore up policy change over time. So that's kind of what we've been thinking about around economically just narratives. And so in this process to build this cohort and do this deep level work, we've been raising, we've needed money to do that. So we've been in the process of raising funds to help support the community-based organizations and partners and fellows who will be a part of that work, as well as our national practitioners and project coordinators. So we are about 40% of the way towards raising our total funds. And then we are in the process now of developing the job description for the program coordinator. And when that is finalized and the work group has approved it, then we will be, sharing that out with the networks with all of you to see, who might be interested and to share it with your networks. And then we're at the same time be building that cohort and inviting organizations to be part of that. And then ideally we'll be starting that work and starting our deep dive work into economically just narratives sometime, hopefully this early to midsummer. That's the goal. We'll see, but that's the hope. I don't know if anybody has any questions, or if Carlos or anyone else from that group wants to jump in and add more.
I have a question, if I could, Annette. Thank you for the update. My name is Alejandro Caral, Oregon Center for Public Policy. I'm curious about how sort of your general framework around the narrative, because it might define how you sort of set up your North Star. And what I'm getting at is whether the narrative is centered around highlighting or identifying the structural injustices that lead to the outcomes that we see, or is it what does the government have to? I mean, what is the general thrust of that frame? Because I think that will really define how we lay out that North Star.
Right. So, I mean, so in general, I would just say that the narratives are something that we'll be co-creating together in the group. But in general, that is exactly right, that we want to be moving these conversations from these individual-based narratives around poverty and, things that have been with us for so long that have held back transformative change, to this more structural systems analysis that's really gets at some of the roots around like anti-Blackness and racism and is really focusing us towards systems of abundance for, Black, Indigenous, Latine organizations and people and communities. And so I think I will say that's the general thrust, but as I said, like a lot of the work and part of what we want to be doing is to really think about starting with that cohort, because we know this will be work that will be shared out broadly, and we are trying to, but starting with that group to think about what is it that we're doing already that might actually already be harmful, that we want to be undoing. We ourselves don't want to be, replicating or reproducing any of those injustices, and so to kind of do a deep landscape analysis about what it is that we're doing, and then also, and then thinking about what is it that where are we trying to orient towards, what kinds of change are we trying to make in the world, starting with Oregon, but I also think this work can be shared out more broadly, but of course starting in thinking about how do we, if we're focusing on BIPOC communities, and how does that help all Oregonians thrive?
Great, thank you.
Can I add a thought? Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Santos. It's nice to see you all. I'm from the Institute for Community Health. Our new research center is the Leah Zalman Center for Immigrant Health Research. So I don't know if others who are here were able to attend this amazing, mind-blowing webinar this week that Race Forward put together, but I wanted to just raise up that they have a butterfly lab for narrative change work, and they have sort of some really incredible just experiments going on right now around narrative change. And one of the things that I took away from hearing about their work was, it's sort of about decentering the white supremacist culture that's embedded in a lot of these narratives. And so centering cultural and spiritual and artistic narratives, like elements of life that are decentered through white supremacy. That was one of the biggest takeaways that I had, just hearing about how the different groups were lifting up how they think about abundance and well-being and thriving going forward. So I think it is hard to say at this stage what the narratives will be, but the work itself is mind-blowing, and I'm so excited for it to happen in Oregon.
And I should just say, because I realize that I was gently reminded, I did not introduce myself. I'm sorry, I just wanted to say quickly, I'm Annette Case. I'm with the Asset Funders Network. It's a hazard of Zoom. Anyone else? Thank you, Jess, for that. And thank you, Alejandro. Anyone else have any other questions, thoughts, comments?
This is Holly. I just wanted, I'm so excited about this work. I wanted to bookmark something that came up with talking with a friend about this. She works with Outside the Frame, which is an organization in Portland that supports youth, at-risk youth, to make films. And they also do films for different people. Anyway, she was listening to sort of me talk about the narrative work, and just asking if we had integrated the idea of film into the part of the conversation about how is this going to go out. And it was really interesting to me to think about the power, certainly in her work, the way that it empowers the youth to be able to share their story from a safe, supported space, right? They get to make their statement, they get to share, and the visual, the auditory, all of these elements that are wordiness, our tendency toward wordiness, doesn't speak to people. It doesn't speak to a lot of people. And film, I struggle with this all the time. We center narratives of our savers, and I feel very worried about them in some of the spaces that we ask them to go. They're not safe spaces for many of our savers. And I was just like, ooh, that is exciting. Like that sense of like shifting the space of control when we're really starting to think about how do we bring these messages out. So I want that bookmarked for me, and thought I'd show that in this space because I thought it was a really provocative question.
Thank you, Holly. Yeah, absolutely. We, again, I will just say there's a lot that's unknown because we are in the process of doing, coming together and doing the work, but we absolutely have sort of space in the budget for work like that because we think it's really important and really want to be, lifting up different ways to tell stories and create safe spaces. And so thank you.
Great. Thank you, Annette. I really appreciate that update. And if you have any more questions or any other thoughts, Annette, maybe you could put your email in the chat and y'all can get connected. I was also reminded that I didn't introduce myself. So hello, I'm Ethan Livermore. I'm the economic justice organizer over here at Neighborhood Partnerships. I help convene this group along with support my colleagues in other organizing work around NP. Hello, it's good to see you. I think we're kicking it over to Carlos for a brief update on the economic justice policy work group.
Thanks, Ethan. Good morning. Buenos dias, everyone. I'm Carlos David Garcia. You see him pronouns, and I serve as the executive director at Neighborhood Partnerships. Welcome, many of you, to our quarterly Economic Justice Roundtable meeting. It's great to see a lot of new faces today. Thank you all for making space and for being in community with us today. I wanted to give a quick update on our economic justice policy work group. This is our third work group that was developed maybe as a step back. Last summer, we had a conversation with our community about what would be needed and what would be supportive for this work moving forward. And so these three work groups were what we heard from our community, continuing to organize and bring more folks into the fold, work around narrative, and then a policy agenda. So the policy agenda work group has been convening since last fall. And I got to give a quick shout out to my colleague, Lauren Aldoza, who wasn't able to be here. He's been doing tremendous work supporting this work group. and has taken some much needed time to rest and restore. So he couldn't be here with us today, but just wanted to give a quick shout out because he's been supporting a lot of this work. But again, the goal for the policy work group is really to, again, create this work group to center the experience and solutions of BIPOC communities and culturally specific partners in the legislative policy design and advocacy. So the work group has been really working to co-develop an economic policy framework, an agenda that, again, with our community-based organizations and grounded in our collective values as we move to advance a policy agenda that would again addresses racial disparities and financial well-being. We've talked a lot about making it system solutions to systems problems that we have. We've tried to envision things that would make things 10 times better, not just 10% better. And to, again, uplift the work, the amazing work that's already happening within our community, led by our community partners. So we'll hear a little bit from some of you all that have been doing this work this last legislative session. So if you go to the next slide, Lauren, or sorry, Ethan. Lauren's here in spirit with us. So after the review of all the legislative bills that were introduced in the 2020 session, again, our work group identified bills, 4 bills and 1 budget proposal for the work group, and unanimously agreed to send to the full committee for our steering committee for approval. So very excited this year. We had our first economic justice policy agenda, and I think the couple things that we were looking at for this session was, again, bills that had unprecedented investments, that were new investments and funding into programs and ideas that were still not created. Again, we saw bills that addressed critical racial disparities in financial well-being and opportunity. And third, I think, attempted to address, to some degree, systems change for our institutions. We also reflected on just being real about where we were at. We're still building. We wanted to be in reality about what our capacity was. And again, the work group felt that there was a number of measures that we could get behind and support and have impact on. I think there was a lot of other measures that were related to economic justice this short session, where it already felt like there was a strong network convening and groups doing that work. So we tried to prioritize bills and measures that where we could have an impact and we could support getting them over the finish line. So again, the policy work group recommended, and then our steering committee approved our 2022 economic justice policy agenda. We had 5 bills and measures, and with 1 priority bill, the Equity Investment Act, which passed, yay. And the others we were trying to figure out how we lend support and how we continue to support them through the short session. So at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to Ethan to walk us through our policy agenda, what passed, what didn't pass, and then we'll take it from there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carlos, for that overview. So now I'll walk us through each of the measures that were on our policy agenda. These aren't going to be incredible deep dives, but thankfully we have some experts in the room, as we always do. So a couple of our partners will be telling us a little bit about some of the bills that passed, which I'm very, very excited about. So the first one, I'll invite our wonderful state senator to share a little bit about the Equity Investment Act. What was up with it this session, and sort of give an overview and talk about it. So Senator Lawrence Spence.
Thank you so much, Ethan. Again, Akasha Lawrence Spence, State Senator for District 18. So the Equity Investment Act was a bill that a coalition, a large coalition of over 100 stakeholders came together to craft. And it's just like what it says on the screen. It was really rooted in the fact that, you know, the war on drugs and decades of over-policing and mass incarceration have done a lot to really marginalize the wealth in BIPOC communities. And we really wanted to figure out a holistic solution to helping our communities stand on their own, and stand on their own is really a complicated thing. So I don't want people to think that we believe in bootstrapping or anything like that. It's really about crafting a situation in which we have community-based economics, and we are not consigning our communities to work for or to rely on entities that are looking to extract wealth and not provide wealth. And when I talk about wealth, we're talking about monetary wealth, asset building, but also community wealth and the power to make decisions, buy-in for yourself, right? And so the act really looked at, we asked for $50 million to be able to upskill workforces, provide funds to enable home and land ownership and small business entrepreneurship. That money was cut to $15 million. And we're still expected to create a statewide impact with that 15 million. So it's going to be challenging through the rulemaking process, which we're very excited to engage with Business Oregon on. You know, Janet has a lot of, I don't think she's here today, but she's our board chair at Neighborhood Partnerships, and she has provided a lot of insight into the rulemaking process because she used to work at Business Oregon and has helped us really understand the levers we need to pull. Because too often what happens with bills is that we pass things and then we think the job is done. But the implementation is where the meat is, right? Is where our communities and our CBOs who would be the grant recipients would be able to gain access to the funds and also be able to upskill, right? So a lot of our CBOs, our smaller CBOs, don't have the staff to provide, to engage in this granting process. And we wanted to be able to give them the opportunity to utilize the funds, to be able to even gain access to them, and then also provide that technical assistance and marketing so that folks know that the fund is open and available, but also not just to the CBOs, but to the entrepreneurs and to the community that would be able to gain access to those resources. So we're really looking for, and I'm making a pitch right now, they're really looking for folks to engage with us on rulemaking, because again, that is the critical part of this bill. I am really grateful for our partners in helping us get this across the finish line. I will say that it was not easy, right? A lot of folks talked about the fact that when we crafted the Oregon Cares Fund, there was a lawsuit. And could there be a lawsuit now because we are targeting people specifically because of their race? But we also, you know, the program is about having 2 or more risk factors, which also includes socioeconomic status, which also includes citizenship status, as we welcome refugees of all races and ethnicities, right? It also includes having living in a rural geographic area. So it's going to be inclusive of a larger swath of Oregonians who have been economically marginalized. And the goal is to really help our communities build the assets that make them resilient in the face of economic shocks. We've seen it with COVID, we've seen it with the 2008 recession, and really seen how those periods tend to strip wealth, and we're trying to build it and grow it and make sure that it's intergenerational and that it's not just for right now, but it builds and you compound it in the future. And I think that is it. But if you are interested in rulemaking and being a part of that process, if you are representing a CBO who has been through a granting process and has done this with the state, I welcome you to join us in the process and help us moving forward to make sure that it is seamless and that it actually works for your organization.
Thank you, Senator. And thank you for all.
Thank you, Ethan.
Yeah, thank you for all your hard work this session, and hope you get to rest up and enjoy some time off. Great. Well, the next bill that we'll be talking about that was on our policy agenda was House Bill 4117. And our partner Megan from OCF has been generous enough to talk to us about this bill. So I invite Megan to tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, thanks, Ethan. I'm happy to be here with all of you today. I work at Oregon Community Foundation, and we worked really hard this session to provide a collaborative of community organizations, many of which are represented in the room today, to move forward with an ability to increase Oregon's participation in the Earned Income Tax Credit program. We know this is a really important tool to ending childhood poverty in Oregon, and that we have one of the lowest rates in the nation in terms of participation in this program because we don't have enough tax preparers and we do not have enough culturally specific tax preparers also. So this bill was championed by Representative Ruiz, who was kind enough to take it through the process. I'm happy to say that it fully passed at a $4 million request level, which was the initial request that was put in. Right now, ODHS is going to be working through the rulemaking process. It will include a pretty significant advisory committee component with participation, and they are seeking engagement and feel that the Oregon Economic Justice Roundtable is a wonderful place to begin in terms of asking for participants to help guide that process of grant making. The hope is really reducing barriers to tax prep by having more tax preparers, by rethinking our models of how we navigate people through the tax system and file for taxes, and ensuring that materials are prepared. These are outdated materials for the most part that are 10 years old or older that were not prepared by the communities that need to access and use them. So there will be a lot of intentionality in creating new materials as well, which can use all of our guidance. So as they move forward, you might be hearing from us again about ways that this group can volunteer to participate in some of the advisory committee components of the work ahead. But we're really excited that this will hopefully allow communities around Oregon to provide assistance to their residents who are able to then participate more fully in this tax benefit that is available to our state.
Thank you, Megan. Thanks for that overview and all your work on that. The next bill that was on our policy agenda was the Universal Representation Bill, Senate Bill 1543. You know, the issue that the bill was addressing being that 5,000 children in Oregon have a family member currently in deportation proceedings. You know, so the bill proposed the creation of a fund for legal representation for individuals who wouldn't be able to afford it. And the bill asked for $15 million. You know, legal fees and funding, you know, these proceedings for individuals can be really, really taxing. So we saw this as an economic justice issue specific to folks who were going through these proceedings. So the result of the bill was that it passed, thankfully. After sort of years of hard work by advocates all over the state. You know, the bill had passed at $10.5 million. So not that full 15 million, but still very grateful that the 10.5 million was given to that bill. So that's a huge relief and I think a huge win after a couple of years of working on this bill, I think. If anybody else has anything to say about the bill, I'll open that up before we move on to the next one. Great. Our next two bills and budget asks that we'll talk about are bills that are things that did not get passed. This legislator paid bill, or the Opportunity to Serve Act, was trying to address legislators' pay salaries and the inequitable realities that legislators do oftentimes more than full-time work for disgraceful part-time pay. And that sets up a system that only benefits those that are wealthy enough to be able to afford to do that kind of work, and leaves the rest in the dust, leaves them at home. This bill was aimed to really help support communities of color to run for office and participate in the legislature to represent their communities. But unfortunately, the bill could not get across the finish line. So as you can sort of see on the screen right here, some of the specific statistics on the bill, but it did not pass, which is a huge disappointment, especially on the coattails of 3 of our representatives leaving the House because it just became too expensive. 3 incredible legislators leaving because this is a huge issue for us. It's a huge issue for the legislature as a whole, and we supported the bill, understanding the implications for racial and economic justice. So that was one of our priority bills that we wanted to update on. If anybody has anything more to say on that, these are just sort of quick glances and updates on the bill. If not, then we'll move on to our last priority for the session, and that was an investment in IDAs, in individual development accounts. This was an ask or maybe a suggestion from the governor's office to add an additional $35 million in funding for IDAs through the legislature. And the result, I think, is pretty cut and dry. We did not get the $35 million. Our advocates, and again, I'll give a shout out to our colleague Lauren and our colleague Allison for all their really hard work, trying to find every possible little nook and cranny where we could squeeze IDAs in, even though the governor had asked us to work on it. But alas, we could not. Many of our champions in the legislature tried very, very hard to keep that $35 million in the governor's budget in a couple of different places. But we got zeroed out, which is never a good feeling, right? That's $35 million that could have gone to individual savers to help build generational wealth, to help close that racial wealth gap. And yet again, we sort of find ourselves with a big fat zero. I'm not very happy about it, if you can tell. But yeah, those were that's sort of a wrap up of our priority bills. I want to open it up just for any questions or any other thoughts before I pass it over to Carlos. This was our first policy agenda. Thank you to everybody who participated, who contributed, who supported, and did all that really great work over the short session. Yeah, thank you all. So if there's any questions or any thoughts, I'll open it up real quick. Great. Well, I will kick it over to Carlos, because here at the Oregon Economic Justice Roundtable, the public policy side of things is important, but just as important are the narratives that impact our public policy. So we'll have Carlos tell us a little bit about what narratives did we hear during the short session. Carlos?
Thanks, Ethan. If you'll actually take one, go back one slide, I wanted to call out something that I think, thank you, Akash, or Senator Lawrence Spence and Megan, for calling out in terms of the work that we've been outlining in the policy work group and as an organization ourselves, right? It's about organizing toward the advocacy and the passing of these bills, but the work doesn't stop there. It continues with the rulemaking. So thanks for calling out those items. And even as this gets implemented, right, like what's working, what's not working, and then going back and tweaking and increasing the amount of the investment, both of those bills, or the 3 bills that did pass, are going to need moving forward. So just thank you for modeling that. And I think that's one thing we're thinking about is this process continues, and it has to be an iterative process where that information is getting looped back around to decision makers in the legislative process. So, Nat, go for it, Senator.
I would just, I think part of what we talked about in the intro is systems change. And as we look at some of the new people who are going to be, who have secured leadership positions in the legislature and who will be vying for leadership positions, specifically Senate President in the legislature, I think we have to remind them over and over again that their job is not to protect the institution, but it is to craft the systems change that we've been asking for. So I think part of, in the narrative, that we espouse or that we bring forward, it has to be about holding them accountable to true systems change and breaking through the opaqueness of the budgeting process. Because we've all experienced it and there's a lot of gaslighting. And if they're going to be truly responsive to our communities, then we also have to, they have to be accountable to us, and we have to hold them accountable when they don't do what they say that they're going to do.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a really important piece that adds to, again, the narrative piece that we need to be holding as we move this work together, right? And it's not, and it has to be a collective of us doing it together, right? If we need to all be echoing and saying the same thing. So that's part of the work here, is like, what are the messages, what are the narratives that we can collectively be supporting to move that transformational change forward. Before I moved into that conversation, I did also want to mention there was a lot of other great work that happened in past before I jump into the narratives. But again, there was farm worker overtime passed. There was a $600 one-time cost of living payment for anyone claiming EITC in 2020 that passed. There was a $400 million package for housing that included support for home ownership, for manufactured housing, for acquiring manufactured housing parks that also passed. And so I just wanted to acknowledge there was other policy bills that did pass that I think do help to advance and support economic justice. And our policy agenda was really geared toward what are the places that we feel like we can help and support, and that we had time to actually connect with community partners that were doing that work. I see OCPP on the line. I'd welcome you all if there were any of the items that you all were all following and pushing with. Just welcome if you wanted to give a quick update on any of the economic justice items that you all were tracking this session to share out as well.
Thank you, Carlos. I was happily looking at the bills that this roundtable had put on its legislative agenda, and I think I counted 3 out of 5 or 4 out of the 5 were priorities for OCPP as well. So you've provided a really great update. What I think really, and we're not prepared to do this today, but what I would love to do in the future meetings is to really think about, how do we move these pieces that in some instances may be one-time shots, like the cash assistance for EITC filers. That was a one-time shot, but it creates an opportunity to build on that narrative about the importance of cash assistance, for example, to support some longer-term structural changes that we recognize we have to make in order to really achieve that economic justice, right? In other words, we've taken important incremental steps. How can we leverage those both in a narrative way and in a policy way? I think are important next questions for us. And OCPP is approaching this and it's something I would love to present to this table in a future session around how we are defining OCPP's policy North Star. In other words, how do we achieve economic justice through a combination of policies that address the tax code and address the budget side of the conversation? Where are we investing those revenues that hopefully are being raised through progressive and equitable structures, not the existing semi-regressive tax code that we have. So pleased to see this progress that we're making. The question I think that is in front of us is how do we then move this forward? And I hope OCPP can contribute to that conversation. And we'd be happy to present some of the policy ideas that have emerged through our many conversations, I think upwards of 40 with community-based organizations that we've worked with and have supported many of the bills that you see here. So thanks.
Thanks, Alejandro. Sorry for putting you on the spot like that. One other last opportunity, if there were other measures that folks supported, worked on that would help advance economic justice, we did our best to try to capture and try to review those items, but again, it was a really short turnaround and timing for that. So I just wanted to check to see and give the opportunity for other folks to uplift any of the work that you all did this legislative session that we haven't talked about.
So Carlos, I'll just mention Oregon Community Foundation supported some of the things that other folks talked about. We also had the opportunity to weigh in on a bill that Senator Przansky had introduced that bans the requirement that people can't pay cash, or it requires that people can pay cash for transactions in Oregon. So a lot of businesses had been going to debit only or credit card only, which is a barrier for a lot of folks going in to purchase things. So we were excited to be able to weigh in on that. We were the only pro-consumer testimony by some quirk of how the legislature sometimes works. So, and it did pass, so.
Awesome, thank you for that, Janet. Any others? One additional one that we didn't mention, but we had Mayor Partnerships had been supporting, and the work of the Stop the Debt Trap had been supporting was a bill that would not allow insurance companies to use credit as a determining factor for rates, and that also did not pass, but we're working on reintroducing that bill for the next session as well. So again, thank you all for that update. We, as you all can see, we had some amazing wins, and then also we have a lot of work to do to continue to move our vision forward. So as we look back and reflect on this short session, wanted to call out some of the narratives that we heard as we've gone through session, and would invite again everybody who has spoken to really wanted to have a conversation around what are the harmful and the supportive narratives that we have all been hearing and pushing through this legislative session as we think about continuing this work and continue to build on a framework for economic justice into the next session and future sessions. I think it's really going to be important for us to highlight and level set what are those narratives as we work through our narrative cohort, also to think about which are these narratives that will be supportive and that will be grounded in community, that will help us to push through some of these changes that we're wanting to see. On the Equity Investment Act, I think Senator Spence mentioned a couple of those, but again, we heard a lot of the narrative around the equal protection, that violate that, and that was a a worry for folks to be able to pass that through. That again, why is money going to specific communities when there's other communities that aren't getting it? So I think there was a little bit of a broadening of who was support or who could get those funds, right? That Senator Spence talked about, but I think that was one of the places that I think as we continue to think through how do we get the resources and the money to those most in need and those most impacted, I think is going to be a continued challenge that we're going to continue to talk about. The legislator pay, I mean, we heard a lot of again chatter about we should just let the voters decide, and again really seeing that as a political and stalling tactic, and that limited government is better. So these are ones that we've heard in the past, but again the structures in place don't allow for equitable access and hence inequities in the representation for who's representing us in the legislature. On IDAs, we heard a lot about what a great program IDAs are, and heard a lot of support when we initially talked to legislators, but again ended up with I think Senator Lawrence Spence mentioned it, like this opaque budgeting process that nobody knows what black curtain that happens, and IDAs just weren't. Other things were prioritized over IDAs. And again, at what point is there an investment, a real significant investment made into helping support wealth building in our communities, and us needing to build champions to be able to and hold folks accountable to that. And so yeah, I think those were some of the narratives that we heard and saw come up during session, but would also welcome folks to chime in and think about what other narratives did you all hear during this session that will be helpful for us to lift up and to think about as we continue to move into the next legislative session.
I'll chime in. You constantly hear the short session is not for these huge bills. We're supposed to just be here to fix the budget and to do this really tiny, these really small fixes, and doing these large bills in the short session is untenable. We shouldn't be doing them. And alternatively, we've heard maybe we should extend the short session and start in January, start a little earlier so that we have more time. We have more time to do the committee work and have more public testimony and things like that, because communities sometimes feel shut out when things move really quickly, and you're trying to galvanize folks to submit written testimony and do the things. So there are those two conflicting but very real dynamics happening within the narrative around the short session period.
Where do you land on that, Senator Spence? What is the solution there?
So just to let everybody know, I go by Lawrence Spence always, so just to make that correction, or Akasha, but I land on the let's extend it. I think that when those rules were made, the legislature was not contemplating the full depth and breadth of the issues that need to be addressed every year for our communities. And I think that extending it, so including more of January, or doing what some other states have done where they allow a certain amount of, because it's really about fundraising in the even years, right? It's about like, we don't allow legislators who are running for office to fundraise while they are in session. So it's really about that. And so either extending it to January or allowing some measure of fundraising while you're in session. We can't just stick with this is how it's been, because our communities desperately need us to make these changes. So I land on let's extend it and let's figure that out.
Yeah, it's definitely one we've talked about internally, and thinking about what is going to be supportive for getting, yeah, our bills and measures that are important to us. And it seems really difficult and a lot of urgency crammed into, the 5 weeks that the short session is. So. Other items folks heard about. Megan, I don't know if you're willing to share, but I think you had also mentioned some around the EITC bill coming up earlier in session.
Sorry, Carlos, can you give me a little bit more context that when you say earlier in session?
Yeah, were there any narratives around the EITC that you all, through the work that you all did this short session, that were harmful and or supportive of the work?
I would love to answer that, but I don't know that I'm close enough to it because that work was led primarily by Sarah Foster and the collaborative. I know it included a lot of groups here today and other groups who are not here today, like United Way and Stand for Children. NAA was part of that, NeighborWorks, UMQA. So I'd be curious what they would say in terms of narratives. I was not actively engaged to the point where I was able to hear. I don't have much to share, unfortunately. I'm sorry.
I think one of the things that, thanks, Megan, I think one of the things that we talked about internally, and again, with some of our partners, is around, within the current system and structure that we have in place, through the current existing tax system. And if you work, right, then you are deserving of this additional amount, right? And you deserve it. So I think part of what, and I think Alejandro, you mentioned this, but if we think about the movement toward universal basic income or guaranteed basic income, those are, I think, some of the narratives and just things that we're going to have to work through and continue to build on to support supporting and giving people what they need, and sometimes that is, a lot of times that is cash. So just wanted to call that one out.
Carlos, I think
sorry, Daniel, go ahead. You go ahead.
Yeah, coincidental co-speaking here. So I think that is a really important underlying point. And I was actually going to bring up another kind of, I think, just broader sort of macro narrative struggle that we're going to keep running into as time progresses and as our sort of budget tailwinds ease up, which is there were a lot of really good and really important investments this session that didn't get funded, and hundreds of millions of really fabulous investments that did, right? And we were able to do that without passing any new taxes or increasing existing taxes because of just the growth in the broader economy and because of, well, how well the richest and corporations did in the past couple of years, right? And so we were able to get our little cut, thankfully, and invest it in our communities. But that's not necessarily going to remain the case moving forward. And it wasn't that long ago that we had billions of dollars every session that we had to either come up with new revenues or cut. And so I worry about what the future holds when we don't have a $2.5 billion federal aid package, when we don't have hundreds of millions of dollars in unexpected revenues coming in from the general fund, and when we have increasing and growing needs and expectations for what we're going to be doing to help address the problems in our communities. I worry these things aren't necessarily going in the same direction, and we're not going to have shockingly large revenues year in, year out. And so I think there's just this kind of fundamental struggle that we're heading towards, where I think that there's been lots of fantastic programs and lots of great work done that's going to be hard to sustain in the 23 budget process, and 25, 27. And I think it's going to really force us to have some tough conversations around our values and our priorities and what we're going to do moving forward, because we will not be in $1 million handout's the wrong word, but like, we won't be in a budget like we were in this past couple years forever. And I think that that's something that kind of keeps me up at night, because I think it's sometimes easy to get really excited about putting, cash out and into communities, because that is like the exciting stuff. That's why we like to, raise revenue, right? That's in many ways what it's for, right? Is to invest in our communities. And so when we have it and we don't have to take hard tax votes, like that's, it feels great. Everyone can, join together and feel good about it. But I guess I just, I'm at this point getting circular and rambling, but it's something that worries me. And I think it's a struggle that we're going to keep running into more and more in the future.
And the only thing that I was going to add that Daniel hasn't said is that, to make it really explicit, I think this is part of what he's getting at, is that part of our narrative conversation has to be a conversation about reforming the tax code. Right. Just recently, it was yesterday that Department of Revenue came out with this audit about mortgage interest deduction and how it, disproportionately benefits white homeowners. Right. And so there are narratives that we can push that initially seem intractable. And trust me, we've been in this conversation about MID before, and there are times when it seemed intractable because of a variety of reasons, most of them having to do with messaging. But we kept pushing for this perspective to look at how it was having a disproportionate impact among communities of color. Those benefits were not reaching those communities, and this report comes out that helps our narrative, right? In other words, we can make a narrative happen, a conversation happen around tax reform that I think is missing from many of our conversations around what are the investments that communities need. So I'll stop there.
Thank you both for that. And in the chat from Jess and Holly around the role of government and equity and taxes, because that might be an important one for us to continue to bring up and uplift and figure out what the counter narrative to that is. So I just want to be mindful of time. I think talking a little bit about next steps for our policy work group. Again, we are also taking a little bit of a break since everyone did lots of amazing work, but we're hoping to reconvene in April and begin planning for 2023. Believe it or not, it already is starting. So again, now securing what's going to be happening is now securing any budget requests within any agency budgets as appropriation. Continuing to brainstorm the issues that we all have been talking about that didn't pass, or changes that need to happen for ones that have already later this spring. In the summer, meeting with members regarding potential legislative concepts. Again, over the summer, continuing to convene our organizations together on language and with members of legislative council to really develop those. In the summer to early fall, interim meetings with legislative concepts, or to talk about specific language around any legislative concepts that come out of our group, and or supporting other economic justice work. And then, later in the fall and winter, beginning to finalize the legislative concepts and having our agenda before the next legislative session. So it sounds like a lot of time, but there's a lot of work that needs to happen between here and there. Again, if you're interested in getting involved with the work group, please reach out to myself or Lauren. I'll put my email in the chat here in a little bit. And we'll make sure to keep everybody in the loop as our policy work group continues to meet and talk about next steps. So I think with that, thank you again for this great conversation. And with that, I think we're going to now transition into the next part of our agenda. I think we've talked a little bit about our vision, and I think part of our vision is telling a different story, and I'm super excited that we've been able to support one of our partners in telling a different story around wealth building and economic justice, and super excited to transition this and hand over the mic to Dr. Andres Lopez, who will give us an update on the racial wealth gap study that they've been working on. Doctor.
Thank you, Carlos. All right, I am going to share. Let's see. Okay, I'm using Google Slide Deck, so let's see how well this works. Okay, 1 second. Usually my right hand mirror is leading these, so hold on. Be patient with me. Let's see. All right. All right. That was easy. Okay, here we go. So I wanted to spend a little time with you all just to give you an overview of the research that we did on the racial wealth gap, and have the opportunity to share with you all. We've done a soft launch now. We're giving our community members another final 2 weeks to review and give us any feedback if there's any glaring things that need to change. And we will be doing a big launch at the end of the month, and then having an economic justice community forum on April the 12th from 3 to 5 p.m. And I'll drop the link for the report and for you to sign up for that forum if you'd like, which will be a really great opportunity to meet folks across the state doing this work and to learn about the research, and really just to come together and talk about economic justice efforts across the state. So really excited about that. This was our beautiful artwork that was done by a student. There's a little art piece note in the report, so you should read it. But we really co-constructed this, and I'm really proud of it because it was really, really fun, and she's super talented. So, all right, we're going to talk I'm just going to try to go through this kind of quickly, but the report really sort of helps folks understand how racist structures and policies are alive and well today. They talk about, provides a framing for the racial wealth gap that we think is useful for understanding how this really big thing. We share lots of data, so I'll share some of that with you. There are some limitations to dominant approaches to closing the gap, so I'll talk a little bit about that. And a lot of that is steeped in the narratives from Black, Indigenous, and Latinx folks who we worked with on this report. And then we'll talk a little bit about investing in community-led processes and briefly on the recommendations. So we really begin the report by, acknowledging that white families in many ways were provided with wealth starter kits in this country, right? And that there are structural policies and practices and realities that prevent people of color from benefiting from the same economic system that many white families have and continue to benefit, right? So really trying to help folks understand that this isn't just about interpersonal racism or discrimination, which certainly shows up in economic injustices and the racial wealth gap, of course, but that there's a lot of structural forces to that. So we really sort of begin by trying to paint that picture. Some of the things that we talk about to demonstrate that is to talk about the tax code, talk about ways that the supermajority requirements, kicker rebates, other things, other tax strategies really protect and reward the interest of those who already have a lot of wealth, right? And that's overwhelmingly white folks. And then we think a lot about financial institutions and services and their legacies of redlining policies and segregation, and access to financial institutions and services that continues to be a barrier for our communities, and then also some structural realities like subprime lending and how credit scores happen for folks, and how those are also get in the ways of widening the racial wealth gap. We talk about debt, fees, and fines and the criminalization over policing, incarceration, particularly of Black folks, but also Latin and Indigenous folks across our country, and how these fees and fines actually result in generational indebtedness in ways that I think a lot of folks are kind of shocked to see the numbers, to what extent those debt, fees, and fines happen in our society. And then, of course, systemic support of land theft and labor exploitation. So really thinking about what's keeping us from repairing some of these harms and moving forward, right? And how racist structures are alive and well, and keeping these sort of realities from happening and from changing. For the racial wealth gap story, we really wanted to tell this dominant perspective because I think that's the one most of us are familiar with, right? We have these lots of data points about wealth and income and resources and what have you, and that's really important. But there's another story to tell about the racial wealth gap, and that really is how communities have come to understand the gap and the ways in which they have survived in these conditions and the ways in which they envision a future for their families and their communities that really don't necessarily align in the same way with some of the dominant perspectives on how we're thinking about closing the wealth gap. And I'll talk briefly about that, but the report does a lot of that work. So this is the framing that we came up with as we were thinking about the racial wealth gap. And we really thought of it around three main mechanisms. And that was one through wealth building, one through economic stability, and then one through wealth stripping. And we wanted to be really specific about these three areas because, again, the wealth gap is so massive, and the ways in which it's reproduced or the ways in which we challenge it really looks different in a lot of different ways. So we felt like these categories are really helpful to sort of get folks thinking about what it means to challenge the wealth gap. Oh, sorry, the slide's a little blurry, but so there is some data. There's a lot of data, There's a lot of data in the report. It's like 165 pages, so lots of data and information. But we do really sort of paint this picture of wealth building, right? That it really is about asset disparities, and we can really see through many years what that looks like for different communities. We also think about then what does that look like? What are assets, right? Like what do they look like individually, or what are the distinctiveness of them? And you can really sort of see here how much stacked the gap is between the assets that white folks hold versus the asset that BIPOC communities hold in our country. When it comes to economic, I can't see the top, economic security, we think about income inequality and financial service discrimination, right? So even when it comes to income or education rates increasing, we still see a great disparity in our state between white and Asian folks who hold advanced degrees versus Black and Hispanic folks who hold advanced degrees. And also that there's still a great deal of targeting to BIPOC communities around subprime lending. And the report has a lot more examples, but I just kind of wanted to share some of these with you here so you can get a flavor of what's in the report. And then this last piece here was thinking about wealth stripping, which is a term that we heard in one of our interviews, and we really wanted to center in how we think about debt, fees, and fines, right? And you see this image here to the left of this table chart. And this figure comes from a study that really sort of uncovered that cities with high fine rates have larger African-American populations. And that is because these cities actually overwhelmingly rely on stripping wealth from Black communities in order for them to meet their needs as a city. And you can kind of see the percentage of revenue from fines and fees and how that correlates with the percentage of African-American populations, right? And then just a whole nother host of data examples of the ways in which there's just a good amount of wealth stripping that's happening, which we don't necessarily think about with the wealth gap, right? We don't think about the extent to which debt and fine and fees actually, keep generations from moving forward, into different wealth building opportunities. So there's a lot more in there about wealth stripping. Hope you enjoy that piece. There's a lot to learn. And then, we also have a lot of dominant data in the wealth gap, right, where we just sort of help paint the picture of what it's like for Black, Indigenous, and Latinx folks, specifically in Oregon. So there's some Oregon specific data in the report, even though not as much as we would have liked, because, it really is hard to capture this type of data in our state because of our geographic and demographic realities. But we do try to paint that picture in the report as well. So overall, and we got this image from the Federal Reserve that's been doing a lot of work around trying to engage communities in the racial wealth gap. if we got rid of the racial wealth gap, that would mean a wealthier Oregon, and not just within earnings, but wealthier in all of the ways that we think about wealth, right? Around more opportunities, more community, more health. But this sort of demonstrates what those dollar amounts would look like. And there's a little bit more information about this in the report as well. So the primary takeaway really that we try to begin with the report by using all of this data is that more than any other indicator, such as level of income or education, however you want to slice the numbers, through whatever variables, how a person is racialized really is the most important factor for understanding different accesses to wealth in this country. And I think the report does a good job of making a case for that for those who don't seem to understand that that's a reality in this nation. The report also does a little bit of categorizing for dominant approaches to closing the racial wealth gap. So we kind of think of them as tools, access, repair, and protect. And we just sort of walk through these different examples, right, of what it looks like to provide tools or access, or to repair harm, or to protect our futures. And we sort of, wanted to provide this categorization to get folks to think about all the different sort of strategies that are really required to closing the gap. And really, in many ways, how disconnected maybe some of these approaches are, in thinking about how they work together, right, to really close the racial wealth gap. So this does a little bit more of that categorizing, helping folks understand what it looks like to do this work. And then we do talk about the limitations of the dominant approaches. And just to be clear here with you all, what we understood most wasn't from our community members that did this research and participated with us, wasn't that the dominant approaches are not important or necessary or needed or even desired to some extent, but more so how the dominant approaches are implemented, the cultural, historical, generational realities attached to those approaches, right? That can only really be understood and supported, or that can best be understood and supported by community members who have had that experience in this country, right? That is what is mostly lacking from the success of a lot of dominant approaches. So we do talk more in the report. I don't know if this slide is the best representation of that, but those are a big part of the limitation. So I'm going to go in and talk just briefly about that here with the last few slides I have left. But we did do some community, a lot of this was community centered. When we first, the original RFP for this research was really more of that data part, the first part, really just trying to make sense of what the differences were for Black, Indigenous, and Latinx folks in our state and maybe across the country. But for us, we knew it was really important to pair that data with the reality of what our communities are experiencing, with their narratives, with their approaches, right? To tell a broader story about the wealth gap that often isn't told, because we really typically only see it around assets and the numbers and the dominant approaches, right? So we did survey folks from those three communities working, who are from those three communities and working for those three communities across the nation in different wealth building perspectives. So it was like foundations, nonprofits, land trust organizations, or community land trust organizations, and really a whole host of other business folks committed to closing the racial wealth gap. And also we also did some surveys, which we were helped with from OCF and Meyer to hear from some of dominant institutions and some of their approaches and other partners across the state. We did have a community vetting session, which is what you kind of see here. We created this mural board and we walked through a lot of the data with our participants and tried to make sense of what was missing and what made sense and what felt good and what didn't. So that kind of gave us a better sense of how to actually shape the report. We learned a lot during that session. And then also we've had a lot of community feedback. So a lot of many revisions, many opportunities for folks to read and provide feedback. And again, one more final one that we have here, which really is important, right? To really allow community to sit with this and have time with it before we hit the final publish button. And then of course we did collect a lot of narratives and think about some communities' desired approaches, which is what I'm going to share with you here next. So one of the things that was just really moving for us was just to hear the different ways in which Black, Indigenous, and Latinx folks talked about wealth and what it meant to build wealth, and to organize wealth building approaches and initiatives within their communities. So, we heard a lot from Black communities about democratizing economies, right? Like really sort of thinking that like, let Black folks make decision about economic justice approaches for Black folks. Like, we really don't need you to be a part of this, right? We would love your resources, we'd love your technical assistance, and we'd love for you to get out of the way, right? Like, we got the answers, like, allow us to make some of these decisions. And then we heard from a lot of Indigenous folks really sort of thinking about regenerative economies, right? That all of the work that they're thinking about in economic justice is around sustainability, right? For generations to come, right? This connection between past and future. And a lot of those discussions then are about the future generations, and that really grounds a lot of Indigenous perspectives towards wealth building. And for the Latinx communities, we heard a lot about workers' rights and protections, and being able to gather together to learn and share with each other, right? This real sense of like, there has to be protections for workers' rights. Historically, we understand how a lot of Latinx folks have been utilized as a tool for our dominant systems, right, to gain wealth, and then not invited back to participate in that in the same way through laws and all sorts of other discrimination practices. So this is really sort of to demonstrate that, it's not necessarily that each of these groups have completely different ideas about wealth, and they want to, and it's only going to work if they have their own way of doing it. But instead, that like if we begin with this cultural perspective, and we can really ground it in the folks who share that history, share those strategies, right? That we actually get even better understanding of what wealth is, even better strategies around how to build it, right? And then there's lots of opportunities to connect communities together in that effort, right? For coalition building, for cross-cultural work to happen, which honors both that culturally specific piece, the piece that's really, inherent and specific to that community from their experiences, but also and one that overlaps and that can be synergistic, right, with other communities. So in many ways, what the report really recommends, or what the report really argues, right, is again, not that dominant approaches are not good and are wrong or not the right approach, but that they're insufficient because they're so focused on reaching an outcome, right? Like, how do we get more Black folks to have bank accounts? Like, how do we get more, saving, more saving dollars? And all that's important. We need to do those things, but what's more important is the process in which we do them, right? So we really try to outline in the report that there are culturally specific, cross-cultural, and dominant-led approaches, and I'll talk about the dominant-led in a second here. But essentially is kind of what I was saying, right? Like, how do we create opportunities where we really can begin with that culturally specific understanding, approach, desire, right? And then where do we find the synergies and the overlapping? And if we can invest in processes that support that, we are going to have much better outcomes, much better results, much more powerful approaches to economic justice, right? Aside from just better, without doing that, we won't get as far, and we definitely won't address a lot of these systemic inequities, systemic wounds, right? And we will not be led by the knowledge and desire, and perspectives that come with these communities who've experienced what it's like to live in this system in a racialized body, in a racialized community, right? So that's really important. And then the last piece was the dominant led, right? That it's not that everything has to be culturally specific or cross-cultural. The dominant has a lot of responsibility, like, get your shit in order. Like, and you can do that. You can do it right now, and you don't need the blessing of community to make things a little less racist, like you should certainly be leaning on community to help you understand what that may look like, right? So community should be a part of that process, but there's a lot of things that the dominant has responsibility over that they should just take on, and they should move forward, right? And so we give specific examples for all of these and what that looks like from the approaches that we heard from our community members in the research process. So recommendations, these are pretty overarching, but if you go in the report, they're actually like 4 pages. So there's a lot of detail under each one of these, and we don't have time to go over all of them. But I just kind of wanted to show the recommendations and let you know that there's some really specific examples there in the report. Beyond the recommendations, there's also a literature review. So the literature review is sort of sparse throughout the report, some of the data in there, but there are some of the data that was not in the report. So you can read the full literature review that informed the report, as well as some Oregon-specific data slides that Echo Northwest used in their work with Meyer Memorial Trust for economic justice efforts. So that slide deck is also in the report, as well as all of our survey tools are also in the report as well. Okay. So I will drop, I'm going to drop this link here for you all, so you can download the report. As I mentioned, this is a soft launch right now, so please don't share this widely on your social medias because we are giving community members a few more weeks to read. But I do encourage you to download it, check it out, reach out to us if you have ideas or concerns or anything glaring that you think we missed. And also on this link, you can what's it called? Register for our community forum, which will be happening on April 12th. And the last one we had in January around our behavioral health research had about 400 community members show up. So it was really powerful. We're really excited to talk about this work, to talk about the roundtable, and to talk about a lot of our partners work across the state. So thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, Andres. So excited to have it come to fruition, and just so much appreciate the intentionality of the process you all took and the iterative process of really working with and by community to uplift those recommendations. I want to open it up, maybe if there's room to maybe have a couple questions or comments before we close today's session. So I'll open it up, see if anybody has comments or questions for Andres.
I just want to offer deep appreciation to the coalition and to Dr. Lopez and Mira and Kanya for the work that they did. It was an incredible process and opened our eyes to a new way of thinking about how we do research. And I really have appreciated getting to know the 3 of them through this process, but most importantly, just thank them for the intentionality in which they were able to conduct this research, and gratitude. Thanks so much, Andres, for being here today and sharing this work.
Thanks, Megan.
Andres, congrats. It's an incredible amount of work. I'm so excited about the contributions just more broadly, honestly, beyond what it means for Oregon, but I think it's like a really narrative shifting piece. So congrats on that. And what do you hope from an Oregon perspective and then a national perspective could come from this? I mean, I'm really asking you more than like from a recommendations perspective, but best case scenario, if this report has the impact that you hope for.
Thank you, Jessica. I would say that it is clearer to all of us and more identifiable how communities of color are leading economic justice efforts. To me, that is would be the overarching goal, right? That there is a more specificity, understanding, and connection with, because so many BIPOC folks are doing this work. They're doing excellent work, and it's not always aligned with dominant approaches or dominant institutions, which is okay, but sometimes it should be. And also, I think there's just a lot of dominant institutions who could take risks. We talked a lot about risks, or pushing beyond their comfort zones to better fund and support these BIPOC specific and led initiatives. So I think that really ultimately is the goal. For me, I'm always thinking about how we have better community led systems, and that is our true answer to justice. So.
I will say just preliminarily, I just love how comprehensive the report is, that it's not saying that this is the thing that you must do to get it done. It's saying that there's a broad swath of things that are tools and resources that are available to us, and putting community first in helping you to drive that narrative is so incredible, because again, you always hear the other thing like, this is going to be it, this is the thing, this is a trigger, and it's not that simple. And I love that the report accounts for that, the complexity of the issue.
Thank you, Senator.
Well, thanks again, Andres, for an amazing report. And, I think it really sets up a beautiful foundation and blueprint for us to continue doing our work around the roundtable. So very much appreciate all of the amazing work. With that, we got 3 minutes left. Ethan, do you want to take us home?
Yes, thank you all for being here, and we just want to wrap it up by opening it up to anybody who has any announcements. Let us know what you have going on. You can either come off mute and say it, or you can put it in the chat. What do people have going on? Well, no problem. I know that we've had a long meeting today, and we're really, really grateful for all the attention that you were able to give us today. So with that, hopefully we'll see you in between now and our next convening in June. But please keep an eye out for any emails coming from me. We just switched over to MailChimp, so maybe some of the roundtable meetings are going to your junk mail. Sometimes it gets stuck in there. So if you're not seeing emails from me, check in your junk mail and get it switched over. But yeah, Mirna.
Buenos dias. Good morning, everyone. Mirna Lorelli with OCF, the Latino Partnership Program. I just wanted to take a second to just express my deep, deep gratitude for the community-centered conversation that we just had, and uplift a very new network that I think will be really critical to this conversation moving forward. The Oregon Latinx or Latino or Latine Community Wealth Building Network as a great example of community leaders that are working in this space to center community and create a shared vision for community wealth building in the state of Oregon. And I feel incredibly proud to have been a part of those conversations and support with some resources along with Meyer and Collins, the very least we could do, and the very, very beginning of a long conversation and work ahead. And just, I think it's also important to stress the importance of uplifting other communities along the way in the work that we do as Latinx in the state. So just thank you. And I just wanted to elevate that and shout out that.
Awesome. Definitely shout out worthy. Thanks for bringing that to us. Well, we are at time. Thank you everyone for your significant amount of time that you're able to give us. Shoot us an email if you want to connect and get involved. But other than that, have a great rest of your week. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you all soon. Mm.